Clearly, bunker-busting bombs like the GBU-57 that was used to strike Iran's nuclear facilities can deal a lot of damage. But who's right about what actually happened to those facilities? Trump or the Defense Intelligence Agency? Or is the whole thing grayer than it seems? One thing that is for sure is that the situation feels like a blur. The United States was dropping bombs one minute, and the next minute, two countries that do not know what the flub they are doing reached a ceasefire that is still holding. For now. But in the aftermath of the attack, there are significant question marks about just how much damage the United States inflicted. So, today, I want to discuss what the preliminary intelligence actually says, and work through the different positions that Iran may currently be in, as it considers how to reconstitute its nuclear program. Let's start with the leaked information from the intelligence report, and how best to interpret it. The whole controversy traces back to this CNN article, and goodness has it been fun listening to people who do not really understand the technical aspects of nuclear proliferation try to interpret what happened here. Going back to the headline, the main problem with the situation is that the Defense Intelligence Agency's report is preliminary. That is laid bare in the article itself. Quote, "It is still early for the US to have a comprehensive picture of the impact of the strikes." But that kind of nuance gets lost in the online conversation. Then there was a bizarrely combative press conference on Thursday, where the Secretary of Defense seemed overly defensive, and spent less time going through the current intelligence and explaining the uncertainty that surrounds the nature of the subject matter, and more time pointing fingers. Meanwhile, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, was also there, and he really just wanted to stick to what happened in Iran. It was a weird juxtaposition. Anyway, what I want to begin with is adding my own 2 cents to the intelligence report, as it provides further context to the path forward for Iran. And, as a forewarning here, the point of this video is not to assess whether Operation Midnight Hammer was a good idea. Rather, it is just to assess the science and engineering behind what Iran would need to do now to build a bomb, after this exact plane hit its facilities. The useful portion of the Trump administration's response to the media report has focused on the theoretical capacity of the bunker busters, highlighting how they hit their targets, and that if you applied the test data to those locations, it would result in a successful mission. This is video that the administration has released in the aftermath of the attack to try to increase public understanding of what the bunker-busting weapons are capable of. And as an academic who specializes in developing theoretical models, I can appreciate the utility of using theory to extrapolate what is happening on the ground. However, at some point, you start needing to look at empirical outcomes, especially when the consequences are nuclear proliferation. In other words, from a technical perspective, it is an absolute wonder that the United States took one of these gigantic bombs, put it on this exact plane, and managed to drop it inside of Fordo's ventilation shafts. It is literally Star Wars Episode 4, except without the benefit of the Force. That was what this poster at the press conference was trying to illustrate. If the bomb goes directly into the vent, it can penetrate further because it is not immediately burrowing through rock. Again, though, eventually this type of guesswork has to give way to actual observable results. The Defense Intelligence Agency's report was trying to get to that. However, and this is understandable, they appear to be just analyzing post-strike satellite imagery, which is something, but not exactly what you want. After all, what you really care about is what is underground. But, of course, looking underground is not so easy. What you would seem to need to get good answers there is information from Iranian sources, which would be more of an NSA or CIA thing. I am also a bit confused by the report's discussion of damage to Fordo's above-ground facilities, when that was not really what the target there was. One more important problem. These centrifuges are incredibly delicate machines. to exploit the tiny difference between fissile uranium-235 and the junk uranium-238, the centrifuges need to spin faster than the speed of sound. Consequently, their manufacturing process has to be incredibly precise. If they are slightly off-kilter, spinning at that speed will cause them to become unhinged. But it gets worse. You have to place centrifuges in this cascade formation, because you constantly need to move the just slightly enriched uranium over to the next centrifuge. Perhaps you see the problem here. If one comes unhinged, it goes flying into a bunch of other centrifuges, forever destroying them too. And then those hit more centrifuges. Pretty soon, you have a serious domino effect. Back to the current problem. Even if the United States did not score a direct hit on the Fordo centrifuges, there would have been a lot of concussive vibrations pushed into the facility. Now, if you are Iran, how much do you trust that your centrifuges are not about to turn into suicidal supersonic missiles? Perhaps you test them under controlled conditions at first, but that adds time. And you also have to ask yourself how long you need to run one before you trust that it will not fail once you place it back inside of the cascade. All of that is something that the Defense Intelligence Agency cannot get at, which is why the preliminary nature of the report needs to be underscored. At the same time, the Trump administration keeps using the word obliterated to describe the state of Iran's facilities. But again, the current method of analysis is satellite imagery. So, no, that is still in question. Okay, now let's look at the timelines that Iran is facing to restart its program, roughly ordered from Iran's best case to worst case scenario, given the uncertainty that we have. Best case, Iran pulled its stockpile of highly enriched uranium from Fordo before it got hit. Moreover, the intelligence assessment that Iran had enriched to 60% uranium-235 was wrong. Instead, the stockpile is, suppose, 90%. There is about 400 kilograms of it, which is good enough for 9 or 10 bombs. Well, at that point, all Iran would need to do is assemble a weapon. How long that takes depends on two things. First, you need to convert the uranium gas back into a solid metal. Iran used to do that at Isfahan, but that has been bombed to irrelevancy. Thus, Iran would have to build a new facility, likely underground, and evade Israel's and the United States' detection, lest the construction site be turned into craters. Second, Iran would have to complete the weaponization part, fashioning an actual bomb and putting it on a missile. Most of that, except for the final assembly, could be done in parallel to the rest of the steps, and it has a relatively small footprint. It is a safe bet that Iran is doing this now if it was not before the war. All told, we are looking at a few months to a couple of years depending on how fast Iran can build and where it was beforehand. And it is worth noting that you could stretch it out to forever if Israel is really, really good at proactively bombing new construction. This helps explain why one of the targets was Isfahan. It could convert the gas into a metal. Moving on, a more realistic situation is that Iran smuggled out its uranium, but it was only 60% enriched, and thus Tehran has no weapons-grade material at the moment. As a reminder, Iran's overall path to a bomb was mining uranium out of the ground, turning it into a refined powder called yellowcake, converting it to a gas, spinning that gas in a centrifuge to enrich it, fashioning it back into a metal, and then weaponizing it, as discussed a second ago. We are now assuming that Iran is in the middle of this process. This helps explain why the United States targeted Fordo and Natanz. We will come back to Isfahan later. Fordo and Natanz held Iran's centrifuges. If the DIA report is correct and there was no catastrophic loss, then Iran would only need to salvage them, turn them back on, and spin them for a little bit. Even though 90% sounds like a long way from 60% enrichment, about half of the work is going from the baseline level of just under 1% to a low enrichment of 5%. Getting up to 60% is like holding a basketball just above the rim, waiting to dunk it in and get to 90%. If the centrifuges are not salvageable, then Iran faces a much tougher climb. The United States and Israel targeted every above-ground centrifuge production facility. Natanz has one remaining, but only because Iran built it so far underground that the US bunker busters cannot even go so low. Iran's next step would be to pump them out of a manufacturing facility and then burrow them down into another extremely deep bunker. After that, you just spin to win, and then solve the metal conversion part. This is looking more along the lines of years to get everything in order if Iran needs to replace its centrifuges. Though I should note that the uncertainty intervals on such estimates have historically been huge, so no guarantees. As a more general point, the media and analyst ecosphere would really benefit from not treating this as purely a science question. Continuing a bomb program is a political question, which completely distorts these timelines. Yes, I know that Iran has come out with a whole bunch of tough talk since the attacks, but I feel the urge to tap the sign here. Israel controls Iran's skies, and it might be a long time before any of that changes. The 12-day war did not go well for Tehran. If Iran is looking at the pure engineering timeline and calculating that it goes all the way out to here, then someone in Tehran is going to point out that Israel is going to expand it even further. And after you account for all of the strikes to disrupt things, or the extra hoops of having to dig deeper holes to avoid those strikes, you may optimistically end up all the way out to here with your timeline. And then you might decide that the whole thing is not worth it anymore. The last possibility is that Iran lost all of its highly enriched uranium, which would further underscore the political problems. Obviously, it is better for Tehran if it has the stockpile than if it does not. But it seems that people may be overanalyzing whether the trucks moved it out of Fordo. Stockpile or no stockpile, Iran would need centrifuges to obtain weapons-grade uranium. It is really just a matter of how much to spin afterward. Yes, you would have to spin a lot longer if you are starting from square one, but the game plan to use force to stop Iran from proliferating is to stop centrifuge production and cascade formation. So perhaps tack on some extra months to the previous estimates, but do not think that the existing highly enriched uranium is pivotal to the success or failure of the mission. It is much more about Israel's ability to mow the lawn, destroying new facilities as they pop up, and eventually convincing Iran to stop trying entirely. Again, a real solution is ultimately a political question of exhausting your opponent into submission. The one extra question is whether Iran also has safe stockpiles of enriched uranium gas. If not, then the truck mystery becomes more important, as Iran would face an extra step in converting yellowcake to a gas, with the reminder that the United States destroyed Isfahan, which was responsible for the conversion process in both directions. I should note that Iran historically has had other facilities do that, facilities that the Trump administration chose not to strike. Perhaps that was a mistake, or perhaps the White House has intelligence that those older sites are no longer relevant. The fact that these alternative facilities are public knowledge and that the Pentagon did not put them on the target list suggests that they are no longer important. But this is one big mystery that will continue for years. For now, if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.